Welcome to this edition of the Housing Ombudsman Service podcast. I'm Victoria King, one of the sector learning and development leads here at the Housing Ombudsman Service. And today I am joined by Claudia Calvino, one of our investigators in our dispute resolution team here at the Housing Ombudsman Service. Claudia, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about where you work within the Housing Ombudsman Service and what your role is?
Hi, Victoria. Hi, I'm an investigator. I work in the dispute resolution team. I've been working here since January 23. So basically, when a resident brings a complaint to the ombudsman, a case is opened, and my role is essentially to investigate the complaint.
Can you just remind us, what is our approach to investigating and determining complaints?
Okay, so we investigate to determine what's fair and reasonable in all circumstances of the case. So we look at all the evidence and we look to see if there's been any maladministration. For example, if the landlord has kept to the law, followed its policies, and or behaved reasonably. So if there's been maladministration or not. So sometimes there isn't, sometimes there is, sometimes there's reasonable redress. It's a variety of outcomes.
So we're going to discuss two cases that you've recently investigated. And the first one we're going to discuss is a case that you determined in February 2025. What was that case about? What was that complaint about?
So it was about the landlord's handling of the residents' reports of water ingress and leaks into her property and the associated damp and mould. We also looked at the landlord's complaint handling.
So it's about leaks there, you've mentioned there.
Yeah.
Landlords' responses to leaks and the resulting damp and mould is something that we actually see quite a lot here in the complaints that are referred to us. And leaks, they can be really complex and they can be really challenging to deal with and also cause a lot of distress and disruption to residents. So what happened in this case then? Can you give us, actually, just for context, an overview of the resident's circumstances?
Yeah, so she was in a block. She reported water ingress into her flat through the front door initially on the 12th of October, 2021. She then reported it several times since then. It just kept happening from various sources, really. So the landlord did do various things. It fitted a storm guard on the door because that's where the water was coming through, and it did note on various subsequent visits though that the door was beyond repair, and to make things even more complicated, there was a crack in the external wall next to her front door where water was also coming in, so it wasn't just one source. So the water that was kept coming in was causing damp to the internal hallway of her flat. So the landlord painted the wall, sealed the crack in July 23. It also noticed some cracks in the gully in September 23. And the resident also reported broken drains outside her property. So, in total, it completed the gully works in January 2024. She complained in March 2024 as she still had water coming in and damp and water penetration on her internal wall. So it's quite a long process, really, because there's lots of things happening.
Yeah, it started in October 2021 and then it didn't complete the works until 2024. So that is a long time, isn't it? Now, the draft guidance for OAB's law has just been released just shortly before we recorded this podcast. And in there, it lists the types of hazards that are under that umbrella term of emergency hazards, which will be coming in as the first part of OAB's law later this year. And significant leaks is listed as a hazard that might need emergency action, but so is damp and mould.
Yeah.
That guidance, that OAB's law guidance on the government's website, has got examples about determining whether something is a significant or emergency hazard, and it's got in there the timescales and the steps the landlord needs to take. And that law will become a key part of our decision-making framework in the complaint cases we investigate. So if this case was happening once OAB's law comes in, the landlord has got those strict actions to take. In this case, in March 2024, the resident still had water ingress and damp and water penetration on her internal wall, which then led to her complaint. What happened after the resident had been through the landlord's complaint procedure?
Okay, so it did do a fair bit. It jet washed and repaired the drainage in September 24. It repaired the front door and also carried out extensive works to the upstands in the communal balcony. There was a lot. It did really a lot of work there. It also repaired the cracks to the external wall around the front door. But then the resident reported she had further issues with the communal drains, and water ingress continued into her front door as of January 2025. Yeah.
Wow, so 2021 to 2025.
Yeah. I mean, they did things, but it didn't resolve the issues. Yeah.
We released back in May our spotlight report on repairs and maintenance, and in that report we make reference to when a problem at a property is more complicated than a single responsive repair. And actually we often find failures that could be avoided if there'd been a clear plan or schedule of works from the outset, or that a full diagnosis of the problem had been done at the start. Because if they're not, it can often lead to a breakdown in communication. It can lead to, a loss of trust amongst all parties, the landlord, if there's a contractor or operative involved, and the resident as well. When you investigated the landlord's handling of the water ingress in this case, and the leaks and the associated damp and mould, what did you find?
Well, basically, it took too long to attend to her reports of the water ingress. It didn't follow its repairs policy because of its timeline. It didn't follow its repair timescales for its major works, major or planned works, as it may be called in some organisations. It took too long to complete the full and final repair, despite going back several times. It didn't do. Had it identified things sooner, possibly could have been resolved sooner. It just took far too long.
I think that's something we see quite a bit in our cases, particularly the maladministration, severe maladministration cases. In fact, actually, back in June 2024, we released a severe maladministration report. It's on our website if you want to have a look at it. And in that, we found themes including poor diagnosis, excessive delays, and a failure to consider vulnerabilities. And we say actually that landlords should be handling leaks more effectively, as they're obliged to do in the Landlord and Tenant Act, and OWAV's law, which I've already mentioned, will require a more proactive and timely resolution. And also, going back to that spotlight report on repairs and maintenance, we talk about when a home's in a poor condition, it can really affect how residents feel. Problems like leaks, like dampness and mould, it can make people feel embarrassed, ashamed of their living situation, but also, the health impacts, the damage to their property and their belongings. And it's especially true if issues have been going on for a long time, like in this case, without being fixed. It must have been really upsetting for the resident in this case, and really frustrating as well. You looked at the landlord's complaint handling in this case. What did you find in relation to that?
It's got a timeline of it. It will respond within 20 days, 20 working days. On its stage 2, and it didn't respond until 34 days later. Now, this may not sound like a huge amount, but those extra 2 weeks, it's another 2 weeks before she can come to us. It's extra frustration. It's just anxiety, waiting. Yeah, I think, had they at least asked to extend the timeline, but they didn't. It just took them that long. And, every week is an extra bit of stress for the resident when there's a situation like that.
Yeah, like we said, it is an extremely upsetting situation. It's really frustrating for the resident, and that it's a long time. 2 weeks, it is a long time.
Yeah.
So a complaint handling code, it says that landlords should detail the 2-stage complaint process and what will actually happen at each stage, and the timeframes for responding. Where a response to a complaint will fall outside the timescales, the landlord needs to agree with the resident suitable intervals for keeping them informed about their complaint. So like you said there, You made a finding of severe maladministration for the water ingress, leaks, damp and mould, and a service failure for the complaint handling. What orders did you make in this case, and can you tell us a bit about these?
Okay, so we found severe maladministration for the leaks, damp and mould, and service failure for the complaint handling. So we made a few orders. I'll talk through these now. So we ordered the landlord to apologise in writing to the resident for the failings identified. Because it was severe maladministration, the apology needed to come from a member of its senior leadership team. We also ordered it to arrange a suitably qualified person to carry out a damp and mould survey, assess the front door, external areas and damp and mould inside the resident's home, and to provide the resident and us with a timeline for repairs. We also ordered the landlord to pay the resident £1,000 for time, trouble and inconvenience in pursuing the leak and the associated damp and mould. This amount was in addition to the £200 that the landlord had previously offered if it hadn't already paid it. So it would have been £1,200 in total, including the £200 that they already offered. So we asked for the compensation to be paid directly into the resident's bank account. We always do that. We always ask for it not to be offset against any arrears if there are any. So in addition to the compensation, we ordered that compensation. We also ordered the landlord to pay the resident £50 for the time, trouble and the inconvenience caused by the delays in its complaint handling, again, directly into the resident's bank account. And we also ordered the landlord to provide the relevant staff in the organisation with training and awareness to make sure that all reported repairs were logged at the time of reporting, monitored and completed within their published timescale. And we asked for those changes to take place within 8 weeks, that training to take place within 8 weeks.
So we're talking about this case because the landlord responded really thoroughly following our determination, and we want to share this with others. So what did the landlord do?
It was really good, actually. It complied with all our orders in a timely manner. So it complied with all our orders within by the cut-off date, if not before, which we would expect anyway. But it conducted extensive works both inside and outside the property. The apology that it issued to the resident was really meaningful. The wording was excellent. It felt really empathetic, really genuine. And it took responsibility for its errors. So it conducted a training session with all the relevant staff on guidance for repair works and its competence and capability processes. And it even provided scripts for workers when dealing with repairs, so make sure that they were addressed properly. And it's also updated its damp and mould policy. So it did a lot, yeah.
And have you spoken to the resident since the determination? If you have, what did she say?
Yeah, we didn't speak on the phone. It was via email. I did try to call her, but she was very happy with the determination, with the decision. Yeah, she's got all the works done. She's got compensation, and things are going to get better for other residents with the new policy and the new processes.
So we also have another complaint you investigated, and you determined this one in March 2025. Could you tell us what this second complaint was about?
Yeah, there was quite a few elements to this complaint. So it was about the landlord's handling of the residents' reports of damp and mould in the resident's property, unacceptable staff conduct, her requests for reasonable adjustments, unannounced visits from contractors to carry out works, the condition of her home following a temporary move, and repairs to the heating system and damage to her carpet and sofa. We also looked at the landlord's complaint handling.
So for context, can you just give us a bit of an overview of the resident and what her circumstances were?
Yeah, she was a secure tenant of a local council. It was a one-bed ground floor flat. Now she had multiple resident vulnerabilities. So there was a lot going on. So including physical disabilities, poor mental health, and she had support workers working with her, and she was neurodiverse as well.
And can you tell us more about the case? So she'd been reporting damp and mould for quite a long time, hadn't she?
She had, yeah. She reported it in January 2022. And the landlord did inspect in February 2022 and then didn't take any further action until February 23, over a year later. And then the work started in April 2023. It did offer to move her to a hotel during the works as they would be obstructive, but it only offered her a few days and she returned to the property and it was it was in disarray. It was not in a good state to live in, particularly for somebody with disabilities, mobility issues as well she had. So yeah, it wasn't good. So the works weren't completed. It was full of builder's debris. She couldn't get to her bed. They hadn't moved her furniture back. This was really worrying because of her situation, her particular individual situation. She also wasn't given a definitive answer about when the works would finish. And also, they damaged her carpet during the works. The landlord did apologise in its stage 2 complaint response in August 23. It apologised for the poor communication, poor planning of works. It offered her £500 and offered to replace the carpet in the living room. It did also apologise for not working to its service standards and not giving a completion date for works, and for the way it had understood her needs. It agreed to give her a new housing officer as well, because she had issues with the previous one, with communication from the previous one. It put flags on her account and agreed to her communication preferences to only contact her with her support officer present. So it did do a fair bit. It did.
And with OWAB's law coming in, obviously they're going to have the stricter timescales that they're going to have to adhere to. But also, we talk about the importance of having accurate records of residents' vulnerabilities and their individual circumstances in our Spotlight report on attitudes, respect and rights. And it's a landlord's duty, actually, to adjust their service, with the aim being, as far as possible, to remove any disadvantage faced by those with protected characteristics or a vulnerability. And in there, we talk about, the adjustment sometimes might be short term or temporary, or it might be a longer term need, but, constantly reviewing that and not making any assumptions is really important. So after the resident had been through the landlord's complaint procedure, she contacted us together with her support worker. Can you tell us a bit more about what happened next?
Yeah, so she contacted us in August, and she said that the damage to the carpet from the water leak was getting worse, as well as to her furniture and electrics. And that the works were still ongoing. This had been quite some time. She wanted help with the situation, as she said it was having a really bad effect on her mental health, and she wanted financial compensation. So the landlord's contractor did repair the leaking pipework and it replaced the living room radiators on the 29th of August 2023. It was obviously quite some time afterwards, but they did do it.
Again, this is another case, isn't it, where it's been going on for a long time. It's clearly a really distressing situation, and that the impact that it's having on the resident must be really profound. As you mentioned earlier, there are quite a few elements to the complaint. So firstly, when you investigated, what did you find about how the landlord handled the damp and mould?
Okay, we found maladministration because it did do works, but there were unreasonable delays of over a year. It wasn't reasonable that she had to keep chasing the workers as well. It didn't work within its repairs policy or its vulnerable residents policy. It didn't update the residents about the status or length of works. It has now completed its damp and mould works, but it took too long. And the adverse effect, the negative effects on the resident were significant because of her multiple vulnerabilities. We haven't made a policy change order, though, as the landlord now has a damp and mould policy, which it didn't have at the time. But this is in effect from May 2023. But the complaint, predated that. So, but they've got that as well.
So the landlord didn't update the resident about the status or the length of the works. And this is actually something we talk about a lot in our publications. And I mentioned it already, but a Spotlight report on repairs and maintenance, we say let residents know what to expect regarding repairs and maintenance. So provide easy to find repair policies and timelines, and have codes of conduct for staff and contractors. It's all right having a policy if you're not going to follow it, but communication, it also reflects culture, and residents often say to us that they can find landlord communication dismissive, derogatory, or even stigmatizing. And in cases where trust is compromised, honest and open responses are important in repairing that relationship. So you said there that the resident had to keep chasing the team undertaking the repairs as well. Again, something we found in our research for that Spotlight report. Poor communication, it leaves residents uninformed, sometimes placing them as like that intermediary between landlords and contractors. And so if you want to have a look at our Spotlight report on repairs and maintenance, we've got some recommendations in that report, particularly around communication and addressing the gaps in it. So do have a look at that. So, Claudia, you mentioned that the damp and mould works took too long and this had an adverse effect on the resident. I've mentioned Awaab's law already, and that law is going to detail the timescales that landlords need to respond within, as it can be a potential Category 1 hazard under their housing health and safety rating system. And also, to those listening, check out our severe maladministration report from October 2024, because we specifically look at timelines in damp and mould cases, and we've shared some lessons within that report. Anyway, back to this case, Claudia, right. What did you find out when you investigated the landlord's staff conduct?
Well, we found reasonable redress. That means that the landlord did enough to compensate the resident, if you like. It acknowledged that its member of staff didn't abide by its code of conduct. It acknowledged its communication failings in stage 2, in its stage 2 response. It apologised to the resident, offered her £250 compensation, and it gave the resident a new housing officer, as well as putting a vulnerability flag on her account. So it did, yeah, I think it was reasonable redress.
It's interesting you talk there about putting the flag on her account, because we run quite a few virtual workshops through our Centre for Learning, and some of the landlords we've spoken to say we put a flag on certain accounts, and they were saying it's really useful for like flagging what the individual circumstances of a resident might be, but they have to have really, really good notes on that system to say what are the nuances of that flag, because each person is individual. So you can put on one to say neurodiverse, but that is such a wide range of things that it could cover. So it's all right putting a flag on, but also really important to have those really good notes as well. The resident said in her stage 2 complaint that the landlord hadn't accommodated her complex multiple needs, and it hadn't made the reasonable adjustments that her support workers had suggested. What did you find when you investigated the request for reasonable adjustments in this case?
Again, I found reasonable redress for this, because the landlord again apologised, put the flag on the account. It also said it was looking at ways to help staff and contractors to raise awareness of support and personal issues. Also, it's added with the other things they did, which I will talk about in a minute. So it really did. I found this quite meaningful, together with the other actions that I'll talk about shortly.
So reading the case notes, it looks as though the landlord didn't always communicate with the resident in the ways that were appropriate for her needs. There is no dispute that there were failings in the way the landlord communicated with the resident and dealt with her specific needs. But like you said, it did apologise, and it added that flag to the resident's record so that there wouldn't be a repeat of that failing. What did you find when you investigated the unannounced contractor visits?
Okay, again, we found reasonable redress. The landlord acknowledged this, apologised for this, and made changes to the resident's record so it didn't happen again. So yeah, they did everything that they could afterwards to make the situation better.
And I know I've mentioned this a lot, but that cold calling, those unannounced contractor visits, is something that came up a lot in our investigative work for the Spotlight on Repairs and Maintenance. And actually, the Stop Social Housing Stigma campaign also encourages landlords to involve tenants in monitoring repair services and acted on any behaviours which might stigmatise vulnerable residents. And that includes issues relating to vulnerability, accessibility, language barriers, and other additional needs. cold calling is included in that, and subsequent claims of no access. And then moving on to the condition of the resident's property, here's a very interesting fact for you. And I've nabbed this from something Rick put out, our ombudsman. So thanks, Rick. Credit where credit's due. We investigated 474% more complaints about poor living conditions in the last budget year compared to 2019-2020, and we found poor practice in 72% of cases, even though almost £9 billion has been spent on repairs and maintenance in 2022-24. Incredible. What did you find in this case then, when you investigated the condition of the resident's property?
Okay, so I found maladministration. The landlord didn't follow its policies. The area wasn't left safe and in a clean and tidy condition. The contractor didn't abide by the code of conduct. The landlord did offer £250, but I didn't feel this wasn't proportionate to the adverse effect on the resident, because the condition of her home severely impacted her. She couldn't even get to her bed and had several health and safety concerns. Also, it took too long to fix her leaking radiators, over 4 months.
That's such a long period of time again. This must be incredibly distressing for you to investigate, and unimaginable for this resident. So you finally looked at the landlord's complaint handling. What did you find in relation to that?
I found a service failure there because the resident initially tried to make a complaint on the 1st of December 2022, and there was no evidence on file that the landlord progressed this. It didn't follow its policy, it didn't abide by our code, and it caused the resident time and trouble and distress in not feeling heard.
So to summarise, you made 2 findings. One of maladministration for the damp and mould, and the other for the handling of the reports about the condition of the property following move to temporary housing, including repairs to the heating system and damage to the carpet and the sofa. And you made 3 findings of reasonable redress. So 1 for how the landlord handled the reports of unacceptable staff conduct, 1 for the reasonable adjustments, and 1 about the reports of unannounced visits from contractors to carry out the works. And for the complaint handling, you found service failure. That's so many things that had happened in this case. So you made some orders and also a recommendation. What were these?
Okay, so we ordered that the landlord, within 4 weeks of the report, apologised to the resident for the failings, again from a senior member of the landlord's staff. We ordered it to contact the resident to agree on any removal needs in readiness for the carpet replacement. We also ordered it to replace the carpet as agreed and discuss assistance options for moving the furniture back. Because of her disabilities, she couldn't do it herself. We also ordered it to pay the resident the £500 they'd already offered, plus an additional £1,300. So 700 of this was for the distress and inconvenience and time and trouble in pursuing the damp and mould issues. £500 of this was for the distress and inconvenience and time and trouble caused by the condition of the property following the temporary move, including repairs to the heating system and damage to the carpet, plus £100 for the complaint handling failures identified in the report. Now, we ordered that the landlord, within 8 weeks, to review the failings we identify and to agree on training for relevant staff, particularly around equality and diversity, repair timescales, contractor code of conduct and complaint handling.
So like the first case, we're talking about this case because the landlord demonstrated some behaviours and actions following the determination that we want to share with others. Can you tell us a bit about this? What did they do?
They were excellent. They offered a really meaningful apology. They paid the compensation promptly. They provided excellent training to their staff, a relationship of equals. They did a really thorough case review. They arranged with the resident and her support worker to remove her furniture, and she chose a new carpet. Now, the landlord paid for removing and storing her furniture and items, all including agreeing dates with the resident when it was convenient for her. And then they returned the furniture where she wanted it, all at their expense. They even provided us with photos of the carpet in place. They also noticed a new damp patch which I hadn't raised, which hadn't been part of the complaint, which they fixed really quickly. They appointed a worker to deal directly with the resident, one of their workers, who's empathetic, excellent at communication, both with the resident and with us. And they just went above and beyond generally. I think it was a fantastic outcome for the resident and just really responsive and empathetic.
It's a shame, really, that it took that long to get there. But at least it has ended with a happy outcome for the resident, and it looks as though things are going to change going forward. You said there that the outcome for the resident was responsive, it was empathetic. Have you spoken to the resident since? What did she say about the response?
Yeah, a couple of times actually. She was absolutely delighted. She said that the communication from the landlord was brilliant after that, and all the works have been completed, and she's really happy with her new worker. Just yeah, she was absolutely over the moon. Good outcome.
Oh, fantastic outcome. So thank you so much for your time today, Claudia. And thank you to those who've listened to this podcast. You've made it to the end. Well done. You can find out more about our decisions and all the reports that I've mentioned on our website, www.housing-ombudsman.org.uk. And if you're a member landlord of the Housing Ombudsman Scheme, you can also get exclusive access to our Centre for Learning Landlord Hub, details of which you can find on our website. Thank you very much for listening, and speak to you all again soon.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much.